Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stood before the towering crystalline structure that housed the Galactic Council chambers. Her jaw clenched so tightly that her molars ached. The massive doors, carved from a single piece of Altarian diamond and inscribed with the symbols of 200 member species, remained sealed against her. For 3 days she had waited in the antechamber, ignored by the council staff who passed by with barely concealed contempt. "Ambassador!" Her aide, Marcus Webb, whispered urgently beside her. "The preliminary vote has concluded. The Zethari delegation has called for an emergency session." Elena's dark eyes flicked to the viewing screen mounted on the chamber wall. The vote tallies scrolled past in luminescent text, translated into dozens of languages. The numbers told a story that chilled her blood. 847 votes in favor of expulsion, 12 abstentions, and 0 votes against. Not a single species had stood with humanity. The great doors finally whispered open with a sound like distant wind chimes. Elena straightened her diplomatic uniform, the deep blue fabric bearing Earth silver insignia, and walked into the amphitheater that would seal her species' fate. The chamber stretched before her like a vast bowl, its walls lined with the delegation boxes of member species. Each box glowed with its own soft light, creating a constellation of judgment that surrounded the speaker's platform where she now stood. High Counselor Vextar of the Hegemony rose from the central dais, his serpentine form casting undulating shadows across the chamber floor. His scales, each the size of a human hand, caught the ambient light and threw it back in prismatic patterns that hurt to look at directly. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of millennia. "Delegation of Terra," he began, the universal translator rendering his hissing words into crisp English. "You stand accused of 17 separate violations of the Galactic Peace Accords, 12 instances of unprovoked aggression against member worlds, and the systematic violation of the sacred doctrine of non-interference. How do you answer these charges?" Elena stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering despite the magnitude of what she faced. "High Counselor, honored delegates, humanity categorically denies the charges as presented. Our actions in the Kepler 442 system were undertaken in direct response to Zerathian raids against human colonies. Our intervention in the Proxima Centauri conflict came at the direct request of the Tau Ceti Federation. We have never been the aggressor." A chittering sound filled the chamber as the insectoid hive queen Kathara activated her translation matrix. "The human speaks of defense, yet their ships carry weapons that can crack planets. They speak of peace, yet their warriors are trained from childhood for war. The evidence is clear. This species is fundamentally incompatible with civilized society." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Elena felt the weight of 200 species pressing down upon her, but she held her ground. "Every species in this chamber maintains military forces. The hegemony itself commands fleets that dwarf our own. We ask only for the same rights and protections afforded to every other member of this council." "You miss the point entirely," rumbled Ambassador Thokmar of the Stone Singers, his granite features seeming to shift in the chamber's light. "It is not the size of your fleets that concerns us, but the ferocity with which you employ them." The Battle of Ross. 128 lasted only 3 hours, yet your forces turned an enemy fleet of 600 vessels into scrap metal and vapor. Such efficiency in destruction is unsettling. Elena's mind flashed back to the reports from Ross 128. The Zerathian corsairs had been raiding human freight convoys for months, taking slaves and cargo with impunity. When the human defense fleet finally cornered them, Admiral Chen had given them one chance to surrender. When they refused and opened fire on a hospital ship, Chen had unleashed hell itself. The Terran fighters had moved like schools of metallic fish, their pilots pulling maneuvers that should have liquefied human bodies, but somehow didn't. The human marines who boarded the surviving Zerathian vessels had fought with a precision and brutality that left even hardened corsairs begging for mercy. "We protected innocent lives," Elena said simply. "The Zerathians were given every opportunity to withdraw. They chose violence. And there lies the problem," interjected Councillor Yevsen of the Collective, her 4 arms gesturing in complex patterns that conveyed subtle meanings in her species' body language.
"You make violence seem so natural?"
"So effortless. When the hegemony goes to war, it is a last resort, undertaken with great deliberation and ceremony. When the Stone Singers take up arms, they sing funeral dirges for the enemies they must slay. But humans? You wage war with the casual efficiency of farmers harvesting grain." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Elena realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day humanity had first made contact with the galactic community. They had tried to see humans as just another species, but humanity's approach to conflict was fundamentally different from every other civilization they had encountered. Perhaps, Elena said slowly, that efficiency comes from necessity. Human space is on the frontier, surrounded by hostile forces and unexplored dangers. We have learned to end conflicts quickly because every day of war means more human deaths. We have learned to fight effectively because we have no choice but to win. High Councilor Vextar's golden eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. And that, Ambassador Rodriguez, is precisely why humanity cannot be permitted to remain in this council. Your species views violence as a tool to be perfected rather than an evil to be avoided. Your children play games of war while ours learn meditation and philosophy. Your greatest heroes are soldiers and generals while ours are poets and peacemakers. But we are not monsters, Elena protested. Humans are capable of great compassion, of art and science, and we do not dispute your other qualities. Vextar interrupted with a dismissive wave. Your scientific achievements are notable, your artistic endeavors adequate. But these positive traits do not outweigh the fundamental danger your species represents. A rabid animal may be beautiful, but one does not invite it into one's home. The comparison struck Elena like a physical blow. She looked around the chamber, seeing the faces and forms of dozens of species, and realized that every single one of them looked at humanity and saw something feral and dangerous. They saw weapons where humans saw tools, aggression where humans saw determination, and savagery where humans saw necessity. The vote has been taken, Vextar continued, his voice carrying across the chamber with finality. By overwhelming majority, the Galactic Council hereby expels the Terran delegation and all human colonial territories from membership. You have 30 standard days to remove all human presence from Council space. Any human vessel found in Council territory after this grace period will be detained and its crew prosecuted for trespassing. The words hit Elena like a series of hammer blows. 30 days to abandon everything humanity had built in Council space. 30 days to pack up 2 decades of diplomatic progress, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. 30 days to become galactic outcasts. High Counselor, Elena said, her voice hoarse with suppressed emotion, I formally request reconsideration. Humanity offers to submit to any monitoring or restrictions the Council deems necessary. We will limit our military forces, accept permanent observers, agree to binding arbitration of all conflicts. Please don't condemn us to isolation for the crime of being effective in our own defense. Vextar's expression might have been sympathetic if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. The decision is final, Ambassador. However, the Council is not without mercy. Should humanity demonstrate over the coming decades that it has evolved beyond its current aggressive tendencies, the possibility of readmission may be considered. Perhaps in a century or two, when your species has learned to resolve conflicts through discourse rather than destruction. Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. The condescension in Vextar's tone, the casual assumption that humanity was simply too primitive to understand civilized behavior, ignited a fury that she barely kept in check. She thought of the human colonies on the frontier, of the families who had scratched out new lives in the darkness between stars, of the brave men and women who stood guard against the chaos that lurked beyond civilization's edge. You believe, Elena said quietly, that by casting us out, you are teaching us a lesson. You think that isolation will humble us, that hardship will make us more suitable to your standards. That is our hope, Vextar acknowledged. Adversity has a way of fostering wisdom. Elena nodded slowly, then straightened to her full height. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a steel that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Then you have just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. You look at humanity and see violence, but you fail to understand what that violence serves. We don't fight because we love war. We fight because we love what we defend. You see aggression where you should see determination. You see savagery where you should see adaptation. You have just released a species that has survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and the vacuum of space itself into the wild darkness of the galaxy. She paused, letting her words sink in. In 200 years, when you realize that there are things in this universe far worse than humanity's capacity for violence, you will come looking for us. And when you find us, you had better pray that we still remember why we once wanted to be your allies. The chamber erupted in outraged chittering, hissing, and vocal harmonics that the translation systems couldn't quite process. Elena turned on her heel and walked toward the exit, Marcus scrambling to keep up with her determined stride. As the doors closed behind them, she heard Vextar's voice calling for order, but his words no longer mattered. In the corridor outside, Marcus finally caught up with her. "Ambassador, what do we do now?" "The President is expecting a full report, and the colonial governments are already demanding answers. There are 17 human worlds in Council space, 47 scientific stations, and nearly 2 million human citizens who will have to be evacuated." Elena stopped walking and turned to face the massive viewport that looked out over the Council station's central hub. Below them, ships from dozens of species moved in carefully regulated patterns, their running lights creating streams of color against the starfield. It was beautiful and orderly and completely artificial, a representation of everything the Council believed about how civilized beings should behave. "We go home, Marcus," she said finally. "We evacuate our people, shut down our stations, and withdraw from Council space as ordered. And then we show them exactly what humanity can accomplish when we stop trying to be civilized." The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks aboard the diplomatic courier ship Meridian. Elena spent most of the trip in her quarters, composing the report that would change the course of human history. She didn't just document the proceedings of the trial and the Council's decision. She analyzed every word, every gesture, every cultural assumption that had led to humanity's expulsion. By the time the Meridian dropped out of hyperspace near Luna Station, Elena had written a document that would become known as the Exile Manifesto. In it, she laid out a simple truth that would reshape human civilization. The galaxy saw humanity as dangerous, not because they were right, but because they were afraid. And fear, properly channeled, could be the most powerful tool in the universe. The blue-green sphere of Earth grew larger on the view screen as they approached the orbital defense platforms that guarded humanity's birthworld. Elena looked down at the planet that had given rise to her species and felt something she had never experienced before: a sense of unlimited possibility. The galaxy had rejected humanity, but in doing so, it had freed them from the constraints of Council law and Council expectations. "Marcus," she said as the ship docked with Luna Station, "send a priority message to the Colonial Defense Committee. Tell them that Operation Exodus begins immediately. And Marcus, tell them that this is not a retreat, this is a liberation." As Elena walked through the familiar corridors of Luna Station, she passed viewports that showed Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. Somewhere down there, in the government buildings of Geneva and the military academies of West Point and Sandhurst, people were already beginning to plan humanity's future. They would mourn the loss of galactic citizenship for exactly as long as it took them to realize what they had gained in return. The galaxy had banished humanity for being too good at war. Now they would learn what humans could accomplish when they stopped trying to be anything else. 25 years after the exile, Captain Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the TDS Prometheus, watching the final human evacuation convoy clear the outer boundary of Council space. The massive cargo vessels, escorted by sleek destroyers that bore no resemblance to the ships humanity had fielded during their Council membership, moved with a precision that spoke of years of practice and preparation. "Final count, Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen from the tactical station. 2,700 vessels have successfully crossed the boundary. No Council interdiction attempts detected. Marcus nodded, his weathered face showing the lines that 25 years of Frontier Command had carved there. He had been a young aide when Ambassador Rodriguez delivered her final words to the Council. Now he commanded one of the most advanced warships in human space, and those words had proven more prophetic than anyone could have imagined. "Signal the convoy to proceed to Rally Point Omega," Marcus ordered. "Inform Admiral Harrison that Operation Exodus is complete. All human presence has been withdrawn from Council territory as per the original agreement." As the last transport disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus allowed himself a moment to appreciate the irony. The Council had demanded that humanity evacuate their territory within 30 days, and they had complied exactly as ordered. What the Council hadn't anticipated was that humanity would spend the next 25 years building something that made Council space look like a backwater frontier. The transformation had begun within weeks of the exile. President Victoria Ashford had addressed the human colonies in a speech that still played in training academies across human space. She had stood before the cameras in the rebuilt Oval Office, her silver hair catching the light as she delivered words that would echo across generations. "My fellow humans," she had said, her voice steady and sure, "today we begin again. The galaxy has told us that we are too dangerous for civilized company, too violent for peaceful coexistence. They believe that isolation will humble us, that hardship will make us suitable for their standards. They are about to learn that they have misunderstood us completely. The applause that followed had been broadcast across 47 worlds, but Marcus remembered that what came next was silence. A silence that spoke of determination, of focused fury, of a species that had just been handed the greatest gift imaginable: freedom from other people's expectations. The first phase had been purely practical. Human colonies throughout Council space were evacuated with military efficiency, but not abandoned. Every piece of technology, every scientific discovery, every cultural artifact was carefully documented and preserved. More importantly, every slight, every condescending comment, every example of Council prejudice was catalogued and filed away for future reference. The real work had begun when the evacuees reached the frontier worlds beyond Council space. These planets, dismissed by the galactic community as worthless rocks in the cosmic backwater, became the foundation of something unprecedented. Freed from Council regulations and oversight, human ingenuity exploded across a dozen different fields of endeavor. "Captain," Chen called from her station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Colonial Command. Admiral Harrison wants all task force commanders to report to Kepler Station for briefing on the new expansion protocols." Marcus smiled. Kepler Station hadn't existed when the exile began. Now it was the administrative heart of a colonial empire that spanned nearly 300 worlds. Each of those worlds contributed something unique to humanity's growing strength: rare minerals, scientific breakthroughs, strategic positioning, or simply the stubborn determination of humans who refused to accept limitations. The journey to Kepler Station took the Prometheus through what had once been empty space and was now the bustling heart of the Terran colonial network. Ships moved along carefully plotted hyperspace routes that connected dozens of star systems in an efficient web of commerce and communication. Unlike the rigid corridors of Council space, these routes had been designed by humans for human needs: speed, flexibility, and the ability to rapidly redeploy forces where they were needed most. As they approached the station, Marcus marveled at what human engineering had accomplished in just 2.5 decades. Kepler Station was enormous, its modular construction allowing for constant expansion as new technologies and new needs emerged. Docking bays the size of cities accommodated everything from massive industrial haulers to sleek diplomatic vessels. Manufacturing centers that operated around the clock turned raw materials from 100 worlds into the tools of human expansion. But it was the defensive installations that truly showcased how humanity had evolved since the exile. The station's weapon systems were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Not because they were more powerful, though they certainly were, but because they represented a fundamentally different philosophy of warfare. Where Council weapons were designed to disable and capture, human weapons were designed to eliminate threats with absolute finality. The difference was subtle but profound, and it had shaped every aspect of human military doctrine. Admiral Jessica Harrison was waiting for Marcus in the station's Strategic Command Center, along with the other task force commanders who had been recalled from the frontier. The room was a testament to human technological progress, its holographic displays showing real-time information from across human space. Star charts, fleet positions, economic data, and intelligence reports flowed across the screens in patterns that would have been incomprehensible to Council observers. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had helped shape human policy since the early days of the exile. "Operation Exodus is complete, but our real work is just beginning. Intelligence reports indicate that the Council is finally starting to take notice of our expansion activities." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of notice, Admiral?" Harrison gestured to one of the displays, which shifted to show a map of the galactic spiral. Council space was highlighted in blue, a vast region encompassing nearly a quarter of the galaxy's habitable systems. Surrounding it was a thin band of neutral territory, and beyond that, scattered across what had once been considered the galactic frontier, were the red markers that indicated human colonies. 3 days ago, a Council survey ship entered the Sigma Draconis system and encountered one of our deep space monitoring stations. The crew reported back that humans had established what they called significant industrial infrastructure in a system that Council charts list as uninhabitable. Captain Elena Rodriguez, daughter of the former ambassador and now commander of the exploration fleet, spoke up from across the table. "How significant are we talking about?" 47 orbital platforms, 16 asteroid mining operations, and a population of nearly 2 million spread across 5 different worlds, Harrison replied. "All in a system that the Council surveyed 50 years ago and classified as having no strategic or economic value." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus felt a cold smile touch his lips as he realized what was happening. The Council had been so focused on their own territory, so confident in their technological superiority, that they had never bothered to investigate what humanity was building in the systems they had deemed worthless. "They're starting to ask questions," Harrison continued. "Our intelligence networks report increased chatter among Council scientific communities about human expansion patterns. They're beginning to realize that we're not just eking out a subsistence existence on frontier worlds, we're building something." Captain James Foster of the Deep Space Reconnaissance Command raised his hand. "What's our official response to Council inquiries?" Harrison's smile was sharp and predatory. "Complete transparency. We invite them to review our activities and remind them that we are operating entirely outside Council space, in full compliance with the terms of our exile. We have nothing to hide because we've broken no laws." Marcus understood the brilliant simplicity of the strategy. Humanity was operating in perfect legal compliance with the exile agreement, while building an infrastructure that would soon rival the Council itself. By the time the galactic community realized what was happening, it would be far too late to stop it. "The next phase begins now," Harrison announced. "Project Renaissance is approved for full implementation. Each of your task forces will be assigned sectors of unexplored space with orders to establish permanent settlements. We're moving beyond colonization into true expansion." The briefing continued for several hours, but Marcus found his attention drifting to the viewports that showed the bustling activity around Kepler Station. Ships came and went in steady streams, carrying goods, people, and information across the growing network of human worlds. It was efficient and productive and completely unrecognizable as the desperate refugee fleet that had fled Council space 25 years earlier. When the meeting concluded, Marcus found himself walking through the station's commercial district with Elena Rodriguez. They moved through crowds of humans from dozens of different worlds, each one representing a piece of humanity's growing diversity. There were asteroid miners from the Tau Ceti system, atmospheric engineers from the high-gravity worlds of Wolf 359, genetic researchers from the Zero-G laboratories orbiting Proxima Centauri. "You know what I find most interesting about all this?" Elena said as they paused at a viewport overlooking the station's central hub. "What's that?" "The Council assumed that exile would make us more like them, peaceful, contemplative, focused on art and philosophy instead of expansion and technology. They never considered that maybe we're exactly what we need to be." Marcus nodded slowly. He had spent enough time studying Council culture to understand their perspective. Most galactic civilizations had evolved on worlds where cooperation and consensus were necessary for survival. They had learned to value harmony over efficiency, process over results, and stability over growth. Humanity had evolved under different pressures. Earth was a world of constant change and competition, where adaptation and innovation were the keys to survival. When humans reached the stars, they had carried those traits with them, and the galaxy had mistaken necessary characteristics for unnecessary aggression. "Look at this place," Elena continued, gesturing at the bustling activity around them. "In 25 years, we've built something that the Council couldn't accomplish in 2000. Not because we're smarter or more advanced, but because we're not afraid to take risks and accept the consequences." As they watched, a massive industrial vessel docked at one of the station's cargo bays. Its hull bore the markings of the Vega Foundry Consortium, one of the hundreds of semi-autonomous organizations that had emerged during humanity's expansion. The cargo it carried would be distributed across dozens of worlds, supporting colonies that were pushing further into unexplored space every day. "The Council made one critical error in their calculations," Marcus said quietly. "They assumed that we would try to rebuild what we had lost. They never imagined that we would build something entirely new." Eleanor smiled, the expression containing both satisfaction and anticipation. "My mother always said that the galaxy would come looking for us eventually. I wonder what they'll find when they finally work up the courage to see what we've become." Marcus thought about the reports that crossed his desk every day. New colonies established, new technologies developed, new partnerships forged with the independent species that lived beyond Council space. Humanity wasn't just growing, it was evolving, adapting to challenges and opportunities that the Council couldn't even imagine. "They'll find exactly what they created," he said finally. "A species that learned to survive without their help, to thrive without their approval, and to build an empire without their permission." As they stood there watching the endless flow of human activity, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. The galaxy had rejected humanity for being too dangerous, too aggressive, too different from their civilized ideals. In trying to humble the human spirit, they had instead unleashed it upon the universe. The Council would eventually realize their mistake, but by then it would be far too late to undo it. Humanity had been given 25 years to grow and develop without interference, and they had used every day to maximum advantage. What emerged from that crucible of isolation would be something the galaxy had never seen before. A civilization built not on consensus and harmony, but on innovation and determination. And when the galaxy finally came calling, they would find that the exiled humans had become something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. A species that no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. 50 years after the exile, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the research station orbiting Kepler 438b, watching the final tests of humanity's greatest technological breakthrough. The planet below was a toxic hellscape by council standards. An atmosphere of sulfuric acid, surface temperatures that could melt lead, and radiation levels that would kill most galactic species within minutes. To humanity, it was simply another world to be tamed and exploited. The test platform floating in the planet's upper atmosphere was barely visible from orbit, just a glinting speck of metal against the roiling clouds of poison gas. But Sarah knew that the device it carried represented a fundamental shift in the balance of galactic power. The Mark 7 terraforming matrix could transform even the most hostile world into a garden paradise in less than 10 standard years. Final systems check complete, announced her research partner, Dr. Alexander Petrov, his accent still carrying traces of his Russian heritage despite 50 years of colonial life. The Council would classify this world as Class 5 uninhabitable. Let's see if we can change their minds. Sarah activated the control sequence, sending me authorization codes that would begin humanity's most ambitious project yet. Far below, the terraforming matrix came online, its exotic matter generators beginning to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in a carefully controlled sphere around the test site. The results were immediate and dramatic. The poisonous atmosphere began to clear as molecular filters stripped away toxic compounds and replaced them with breathable air. The crushing atmospheric pressure decreased as gravity wells redistributed the planet's mass. Even the radiation that bathed the surface in deadly energy was channeled and converted into useful power that fed back into the terraforming process. Remarkable, breathed Captain Elena Rodriguez, who had arrived from the Colonial Defense Fleet to observe the test. She now commanded the CDF Retribution, one of the new generation of warships that represented humanity's evolved military doctrine. How long until the surface is habitable? With a full-scale matrix? 8 years, 7 months, Sarah replied, watching as the clouds below began to shift from sulfurous yellow to a pale blue-gray. The Council's best terraforming technology requires 3 centuries to achieve similar results and only works on worlds that are already marginally habitable. Elena nodded thoughtfully. And the strategic implications? Every worthless rock in the galaxy just became prime real estate, Alexander said with a grin. The Council has spent 2 millennia cataloguing worlds according to their natural habitability. They've ignored entire sectors because the planets couldn't support their preferred forms of life. But if we can make any world livable, then we have access to resources they don't even know exist, Elena finished. How many worlds are we talking about? Sarah pulled up a holographic display that showed the local galactic region. Hundreds of star systems appeared, color-coded according to Council habitability rankings. The vast majority glowed red or orange, indicating worlds that galactic civilization had dismissed as worthless. In this sector alone, nearly 4,000 worlds that the Council considers uninhabitable. Galaxy-wide, we estimate somewhere around 2 million planets that could be transformed using our technology. Sarah paused, letting the numbers sink in. The Council controls approximately 50,000 habitable worlds. Do the math. The observation deck fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity had just gained access to 40 times more potential living space than the entire Galactic Council. More importantly, they had done it using worlds that their former allies didn't even want. There's something else, Sarah continued, manipulating the display to show a detailed analysis of the terraforming process. The Matrix doesn't just make worlds habitable, it optimizes them. We can create custom atmospheres, adjust gravity fields, even modify the fundamental properties of matter within the terraformed zone. A world transformed by human technology is better than anything nature produces naturally. Elena studied the data with the eye of someone who had spent 30 years planning humanity's expansion across the galaxy. What's the production capacity for these matrices? The Titan foundries can produce 50 units per year with current infrastructure, Alexander replied. But we're bringing new manufacturing centers online constantly. Within 5 years, we estimate production capacity of over 300 units annually. Elena's smile was cold and calculating. 300 new worlds per year. each one optimized for human habitation and industrial development. The Council is about to discover that they didn't exile a few million troublesome humans. They released an entire civilization from the constraints of natural law. As they watched, the first signs of life began to appear on the planet's surface. The terraforming matrix had seeded the transformed atmosphere with carefully designed microorganisms that would establish a complete ecological cycle within months. Unlike the slow, random process of natural evolution, this was directed biology at its finest, every species engineered for maximum efficiency and stability. The test proceeded flawlessly over the following hours. Temperature readings stabilized in the optimal range for human comfort. Atmospheric composition shifted to perfect breathability. The planet's magnetic field was amplified to provide protection from cosmic radiation. By the end of the day, preliminary surveys indicated that the surface would be ready for human habitation within 6 months. Send the report to Colonial Command, Elena ordered as they prepared to leave the observation station. Tell them that Project Genesis is approved for full implementation, and make sure Admiral Harrison knows that we're ready to begin the next phase of expansion. The flight back to Kepler Station took them through some of the busiest space lanes in human territory. Sarah watched through the transport's viewports as massive cargo haulers moved between star systems, carrying the products of humanity's industrial revolution to colonies scattered across hundreds of worlds. The efficiency of it all still amazed her, each ship following precisely calculated routes that maximized cargo capacity while minimizing travel time. The space around Kepler Station itself had been transformed into something that dwarfed even the Council's greatest installations. The original station had grown into a complex of interconnected habitats, manufacturing centers, research facilities, and defensive platforms that stretched across several thousand cubic kilometers. Ships from across human space docked and departed, in carefully orchestrated patterns that resembled some vast mechanical ballet. But it was the defensive installations that truly showcased humanity's evolution. The weapons platforms that guarded Kepler Station were not simply larger versions of traditional Council technology. They represented entirely new approaches to warfare. Gravity cannons that could crush enemy vessels without firing a shot. Dimensional disruptors that could phase targets partially out of normal spacetime. Matter converters that turned incoming missiles into exotic energy that powered the station's systems. Admiral Harrison was waiting for them in the Strategic Planning Center, studying holographic displays that showed the current state of human expansion. The map was impressive. Red indicators marked over 400 human colonies, with new ones being added weekly. Trade routes connected them in an efficient network that moved goods and information across vast distances with minimal delay. Dr. Chen, Harrison said as they entered the briefing room, I understand the terraforming tests were successful. Beyond our most optimistic projections, Sarah replied, taking a seat at the conference table. We can begin full-scale implementation immediately. Harrison nodded, then gestured to the star map. Good, because we're about to need every advantage we can get. Intelligence reports indicate that the Council has finally begun to take notice of our expansion activities. They've been conducting long-range surveys of human space, and what they're finding is making them extremely nervous. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. What kind of nervous? The kind that leads to emergency sessions and classified military assessments. Harrison replied grimly. Our sources in Council space report increased chatter about the human problem and discussions of potential containment strategies. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Containment strategies? They exiled us fair and square. We're operating entirely outside their territory. That's exactly the problem, Harrison explained. When they banished us, they expected us to struggle for survival on a few marginal worlds. Instead, we've built an interstellar civilization that rivals their own in scope and surpasses it in technological capability. From their perspective, they've accidentally created a rival power that operates by completely different rules. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The Council had spent 2 millennia as the undisputed authority in galactic affairs. They were accustomed to being the most advanced, most powerful, most influential force in known space. The idea that a species they had rejected as too primitive could become their equals, or worse, their superiors, was fundamentally incompatible with their worldview. What are our options? Elena asked. Harrison manipulated the star map, highlighting different regions of human space. We have 3 basic choices. We can attempt to open diplomatic contact and try to convince them that we pose no threat. We can continue expanding and hope they decide to ignore us. Or we can prepare for the possibility that they'll try to forcibly limit our growth. What's your recommendation? Harrison's smile was sharp and predatory. All 3, Simultaneously, we continue expanding because growth is our greatest advantage. We prepare for conflict because the Council has a history of trying to solve problems through superior firepower. And we reach out diplomatically because we want them to understand exactly what they're dealing with before they make any irreversible decisions. Sarah studied the tactical displays that showed human fleet positions across the galaxy. The Colonial Defense Force had evolved far beyond its origins as a collection of frontier patrol ships. Modern human warships were marvels of engineering that incorporated technologies the Council couldn't even comprehend. They were faster, more maneuverable, and infinitely more dangerous than anything in the Galactic arsenal. But it wasn't just the ships that had evolved. It was the humans who crewed them. 50 years of frontier life had produced a generation that was harder, more adaptable, and more innovative than anything the galaxy had seen before. They had been shaped by challenges that would have broken other species, forged in the crucible of building civilization from nothing in the depths of hostile space. There's something the Council doesn't understand about humanity, Alina said quietly. They think we're the same species they exiled 50 years ago, just with better technology. They don't realize that we've evolved beyond their ability to predict or control. Harrison nodded. That's our greatest advantage and our greatest danger. They'll underestimate us because they can't conceive of how much we've changed. But when they finally realize what we've become, their response will be proportionally extreme. As the meeting continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the terraforming project and what it represented. The technology to transform lifeless worlds into gardens was just the beginning. Humanity had learned to reshape matter and energy at the molecular level, to manipulate space and time itself, to create life where none had existed before. But more importantly, they had learned to do all of this without asking permission from anyone. The Council had created their own worst nightmare by forcing humanity to develop independently. They had taken a species that was already dangerous and given it 50 years to become something unprecedented. The Council is about to learn a hard lesson about unintended consequences, Harrison said as the briefing concluded. They wanted to humble humanity by forcing us into exile. Instead, they've created a rival civilization that operates by rules they don't understand and values they can't comprehend. Sarah stood at the viewport after the others had left, watching the endless stream of ships moving through human space. Each vessel represented a piece of humanity's growing power. Cargo haulers carrying exotic materials from distant worlds, passenger ships moving colonists to new frontiers, research vessels pushing the boundaries of known science. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity hadn't simply survived their exile. They had used it to become something entirely new, a civilization that had outgrown the need for galactic approval and evolved beyond the constraints of galactic law. When the Council finally came calling, they would find that the dangerous humans they had feared had become something far worse than their nightmares had ever imagined. They would find an empire. 150 years after the exile, Supreme Admiral Elena Rodriguez Chen stood on the command deck of the Terran Dominion flagship Ascendant, watching the final preparations for humanity's greatest military exercise. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency that had become humanity's trademark, their movements precise and economical as they coordinated the deployment of forces across 17 star systems. Through the massive viewports that dominated the forward section of the bridge, Elena could see just a fraction of the assembled fleet. The ships that hung in formation around the Ascendant represented the culmination of a century and a half of human military evolution. They were sleek predators of dark metal and crystalline energy conduits, their hulls incorporating technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. "Fleet status report," Elena commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been born into command and shaped by 50 years of frontier warfare. 7th Fleet reports ready for deployment, announced Captain James Morrison from the tactical station. Admiral Petrov's forces are holding position at Rally Point Zeta. 9th Fleet is completing final system checks and will be ready within the hour. Elena nodded, studying the holographic display that showed the current disposition of human forces. 3 full battle fleets, each comprising over 600 vessels, were preparing for an operation that would demonstrate humanity's military capabilities to any Council observers who might be watching. It was a message written in fire and steel, an announcement that the species the galaxy had once dismissed as too primitive for civilization had become the dominant military power in the known universe. Long-range sensors are detecting Council observation posts at the edge of the Proxima Centauri system, reported Commander Sarah Kim from the intelligence station. They're maintaining a respectful distance, but they're definitely taking notes. Elena smiled grimly. The Council's sudden interest in human military exercises was hardly surprising. Over the past 50 years, humanity had expanded beyond the frontier territories and begun establishing colonies in what the galactic community considered neutral space. Each new human world represented a shift in the balance of power, and the Council had finally begun to realize that their former exiles were no longer content to remain hidden in the galactic backwaters. Let them watch, Alina said. They wanted to see what humanity could become when freed from their constraints. Today, they get their answer. The exercise began at exactly 1400 hours Terran Standard Time, as 3 separate human fleets launched simultaneous operations across different star systems. The scenarios had been carefully designed to showcase the full range of human military capabilities, not just raw firepower, but the speed, coordination, and tactical innovation that had made human forces legendary throughout the galaxy's independent systems. Elena watched through the command center's displays as 7th Fleet began its assault on the heavily fortified Kepler 442 system. The simulated enemy defenses were based on actual Council military installations, complete with overlapping shield grids, mobile defense platforms, and automated weapon systems. It was the kind of defensive setup that would challenge any conventional force. Human forces didn't operate conventionally. The attack began with what appeared to be a standard frontal assault by heavy cruisers and battleships. The enemy defenses responded predictably, concentrating fire on the largest threats while preparing for a protracted siege. That was when humanity's true nature revealed itself. Phase displacement complete, reported the tactical officer. Infiltration units are in position. Elena watched as dozens of smaller vessels simply vanished from the display, their exotic drive systems allowing them to slip through normal spacetime like ghosts. When they reappeared, they were inside the enemy defense perimeter, striking at command centers and power nodes with surgical precision. The defensive grid collapsed in minutes, leaving the orbital platforms defenseless against the main assault force. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly unlike anything in Council military doctrine. Where galactic forces relied on overwhelming firepower applied over extended periods, humans had perfected the art of finding and exploiting weaknesses with devastating speed. The entire engagement was over in less than 30 minutes, with simulated casualties on the defending side approaching 90%. 9th Fleet reports similar success at Wolf 359, announced the communications officer. Admiral Hassan's forces have completed their objectives ahead of schedule. Elena studied the after-action reports as they came in from each battle group. Every exercise was ending the same way. Complete human victory achieved through tactics that Council observers would find incomprehensible. The galaxy's military establishment was built around the concept of honorable warfare, with rules and conventions that limited the scope of acceptable tactics. Humanity had never agreed to those limitations. Admiral, Commander Kim said quietly, we're receiving a priority transmission from Central Command. Council forces are mobilizing along our border sectors. Elena felt a familiar coldness settle in her stomach. For months, intelligence reports had indicated growing concern within the Council about human expansion. What had started as occasional surveillance missions had evolved into something much more serious. Fleet movements that suggested preparation for military action. What kind of mobilization? 3rd and 5th battle groups have been deployed to staging areas in the Vega and Altair systems. Combined strength of approximately 800 vessels, plus supporting logistics trains. Elena studied the tactical display as it shifted to show the broader strategic situation. Council forces were positioning themselves along the borders of human space in what could only be interpreted as a prelude to invasion. The formations were textbook examples of galactic military doctrine. Massive concentrations of firepower designed to overwhelm enemy defenses through superior numbers and technology. It was exactly the kind of thinking that would get them slaughtered. Signal all fleet commanders, Elena ordered. Exercise Prometheus is now a live operation. All forces are to maintain current readiness levels and await further orders. Quote, the transformation was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the star systems where human forces were deployed, crews shifted from training mode to combat readiness. Weapon systems that had been firing simulated rounds switched to live ammunition. Defensive fields that had been operating at reduced power ramped up to full strength. In a matter of minutes, humanity's greatest military exercise had become preparation for the galaxy's next war. Admiral Harrison is requesting immediate conference with all fleet commanders, reported the communications officer. Priority Alpha encryption. Elena made her way to the secure communications chamber in the heart of the Ascendant, where holographic projectors created a virtual meeting space that connected her with human military leaders across dozens of star systems. Admiral Jessica Harrison appeared first, her image flickering as the quantum entanglement communicators struggled to maintain coherence across galactic distances. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison began without preamble. The Council has made their decision. Intelligence sources confirm that they intend to launch what they're calling a containment operation against human expansion efforts. They believe that our growing influence threatens galactic stability. General Marcus Foster of the Colonial Marines materialized in the chamber, his scarred features bearing witness to decades of frontier warfare. Rules of engagement? The Council has not formally declared war, Harrison replied. They're framing this as a police action to enforce galactic law. Apparently, our terraforming operations violate some ancient treaty about environmental modification. Elena felt her jaw clench. They're using legal pretext to justify a preemptive strike. How many worlds are they targeting? Our sources indicate coordinated attacks on 17 human colonies, including 3 of our major industrial centers. They believe that destroying our manufacturing capacity will force us to accept Council oversight of our expansion efforts. The virtual chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Council wasn't just trying to limit human growth, they were preparing to cripple humanity's ability to defend itself. It was the kind of mistake that could only be made by leaders who fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. Timeline? Asked Admiral Sarah Petrov from her flagship in the Tau Ceti system. 48 hours, Harrison replied. Council forces will begin their operation at 0600 hours Galactic Standard Time on Tuesday. Elena studied the faces of her fellow commanders, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their expressions. The Council had spent the past century and a half dismissing humanity as a frontier curiosity, a minor power that could be ignored or managed as necessary. They were about to discover that the exiled humans had evolved far beyond their ability to control. Recommendations? Harrison asked. We make them regret it, Elena said simply. The Council wants to demonstrate their superiority through force. We show them what humanity learned during 150 years of fighting for survival in the galactic wilderness. General Foster's smile was cold and predatory. The boys and girls are going to enjoy this. It's been too long since we had a proper war. This isn't about enjoyment, Harrison cautioned. This is about survival. The Council commands fleets that outnumber us 3-1. If we're going to win this, we need to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than they are. Elena nodded slowly. Then we play to our strengths. The Council fights wars the way their ancestors did. Massive fleets, prolonged engagements, victory through attrition. We've learned to fight dirty, to strike where they don't expect us, and to end conflicts before they begin. Operation Nemesis? Foster asked. Operation Nemesis, Harrison confirmed. Full authorization for all contingency protocols. The gloves come off. As the conference ended and the holographic projections faded, Elena found herself alone in the communications chamber with the weight of impending war pressing down upon her. Through the chamber's single viewport, she could see the lights of human ships stretching into the distance, each one representing thousands of crew members who had been born and raised in the shadow of the exile. These were not the same humans who had been banished from the Council chambers a century and a half ago. They were harder, more adaptable, and utterly without the moral constraints that limited Council warfare. They had been forged in the crucible of frontier life, shaped by challenges that would have broken other species. The Council was about to learn what happened when you took a naturally dangerous species and gave it a century and a half to evolve without supervision. Elena made her way back to the command deck where her crew was already implementing the operational changes that would transform their fleet from an exercise force into an instrument of war. The efficiency was remarkable. Weapon systems coming online, defensive protocols activating, target acquisition systems scanning for potential threats. Status report, she commanded. All vessels report ready for combat operations, Captain Morrison replied. Admiral Petrov's forces are moving to intercept positions along the Council advance routes. Admiral Hassan is deploying her fleet to protect the industrial centers. Elena nodded, then activated the ship-wide communications system. Her voice would be carried to every human vessel in the fleet, and through them to the colonies and worlds that made up humanity's interstellar empire. Attention all hands, she began, her words carrying the weight of history. The Galactic Council has decided that humanity's growth threatens their vision of galactic order. They intend to use force to limit our expansion and place our worlds under their supervision. They believe that superior numbers and established doctrine will allow them to dictate terms to us. She paused, looking out at the assembled fleet. They are wrong. For 150 years, humanity has built something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization based not on consensus and compromise, but on innovation and determination. We have taken worlds they considered worthless and turned them into gardens. We have developed technologies they consider impossible. We have become something they cannot understand or control. The ship thrummed around her as weapon systems charged, and targeting computers acquired locks on distant Council vessels. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when you banish the wolves and then wonder why they return at the head of the pack. The Council wanted to see what humanity could become when freed from their constraints. They're about to get their answer. Elena closed the channel and turned her attention to the tactical displays. In 48 hours, the galaxy would witness the culmination of everything humanity had learned during its exile. The Council would discover that they hadn't simply failed to humble the human spirit, they had unleashed it upon the universe. And this time, there would be no exile to save them from the consequences. 200 years after the exile, High Counselor Vexstar stood in the same crystalline chamber where humanity had once been banished. But the circumstances could not have been more different. The great amphitheater, once filled with the confident voices of 200 member species, now echoed with desperate whispers and barely contained panic. Around him, the surviving delegates of the Galactic Council huddled in small groups, their conversations muted by fear and disbelief. In the past 6 months, 17 Council worlds had fallen to an enemy that struck without warning and vanished before retaliation could be organized. The ancient networks of trade and communication that had bound galactic civilization together for millennia were crumbling under the assault of forces that seemed to materialize from the void itself. High Counselor. Ambassador Thokmar approached with the heavy footsteps that characterized his stone Sinner heritage, but his granite features showed cracks of stress that Vexstar had never seen before. The Terran delegation has arrived. They're requesting immediate audience. Vexstar felt his scales ripple with involuntary fear. The humans had returned to Council space not as supplicants seeking readmission, but as conquerors offering terms. The transformation was so complete, so utterly incomprehensible, that many Council members still refused to believe the reports coming from the frontier. How many ships? Vexstar asked, though he dreaded the answer. Sensors cannot get an accurate count, Thokmar replied. The human fleet is using some form of dimensional phasing technology that makes them appear and disappear from our detection grids. Conservative estimates suggest at least 500 vessels, but the actual number could be significantly higher. Vexstar nodded slowly, remembering the confident human ambassador who had stood in this same chamber 2 centuries ago. Elena Rodriguez had warned them that exile would not humble humanity, that they were releasing something dangerous into the galactic wilderness. Elena. He had dismissed her words as the empty bluster of a defeated species. Now her granddaughter commanded fleets that had swept aside Council defenses like leaves before a hurricane. The great doors of the chamber whispered open, and the human delegation entered with the measured pace of absolute authority. Supreme Admiral Elena Rodriguez Chen led the group, her black uniform bearing no insignia except the silver star that marked her as the elected leader of the Terran Dominion. Behind her came Admiral Sarah Kim, the infamous architect of the Proxima Offensive, and General Marcus Foster Kim, whose colonial marines had taken 13 fortified worlds in as many days. But it was the 4th member of the delegation that made Vexstar's blood run cold. Dr. Sarah Chen Petrov wore the simple white coat of a research scientist, but her presence terrified the Council more than all the human warships combined. She was the creator of technologies that violated fundamental laws of physics, the architect of weapons that could unmake matter itself. High Counselor Vexstar, Elena said as she approached the speaker's platform. Her voice carried none of the desperate pleading that had characterized human diplomacy 2 centuries ago. This was the tone of someone who held all the advantages and knew it. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Vexstar straightened to his full height, trying to project the dignity and authority that had once made the Galactic Council the supreme power in known space. Supreme Admiral Rodriguez Chen, the Council acknowledges your presence. We are prepared to discuss terms for the cessation of hostilities. Elena's smile was polite but predatory. I think there's been a misunderstanding, High Counselor. We're not here to negotiate a ceasefire. We're here to inform you of new galactic realities. The chamber fell silent, except for the subtle hum of life support systems. Vexstar felt the weight of 200 species' collective fear pressing down upon him. The Council had been the arbiters of galactic law for over 2,000 years. The idea that humans, exiled humans, could simply declare their authority irrelevant was fundamentally incomprehensible. The Terran Dominion, Elena continued, now controls over 1,800 worlds across 12 galactic sectors. Our population exceeds 4 billion citizens, supported by industrial infrastructure that produces more ships, weapons, and advanced technology than the rest of the galaxy combined. We have forged alliances with 47 independent species and established trade relationships that span the galactic spiral. She gestured to the holographic display that materialized above the chamber floor. The star map that appeared showed the galaxy as it existed in the present day, with vast regions marked in the blue of Terran control. What had once been empty frontier space was now the heart of an empire that dwarfed the Council's remaining territory. "This is impossible," whispered Councillor Yitsen, her forearms trembling as she stared at the display. "The frontier worlds cannot support such populations. The resources don't exist." Dr. Chen Petrov stepped forward, her voice carrying the calm authority of absolute scientific certainty. "Councillor Yitsen, you're operating under outdated assumptions. Our terraforming technology can transform any world into a garden paradise in less than 8 years. Our matter converters can transmute base elements into any material we require. Our dimensional engineering allows us to access resources from parallel realities." The implications hit the Council delegates like a physical blow. Everything they knew about galactic economics, about the limitations that constrained civilization, about the natural order that had kept the balance of power stable for millennia, all of it was suddenly meaningless. "The Vorthan crisis," Elena said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence.
3 months ago, extra-dimensional entities began emerging from quantum rifts in the Vorthan Nebula.
Your fleets engaged them using conventional weapons and suffered catastrophic losses. 17 Council worlds were overrun before you finally sent a diplomatic mission to request our assistance. Vexstar felt his serpentine form coil with shame and desperation. The Vorthan entities had been unlike anything in Council experience. Beings of pure energy that fed on the fundamental forces that held matter together. Council weapons had been useless against them, their shields meaningless, their tactics irrelevant. "We are prepared to offer our assistance," Elena continued, "but not as subordinates or junior partners. Humanity will deal with the Vorthan threat as an independent power, operating under our own authority and according to our own methods." "What are your terms?" Vexstar asked, though he suspected he would not like the answer. Admiral Kim stepped forward, her scarred features bearing witness to decades of frontier warfare. "Complete withdrawal of Council forces from all disputed territories. Recognition of the Terran Dominion as a sovereign galactic power with full territorial rights. Establishment of formal trade relationships on terms to be negotiated separately." The demands were staggering in their scope. The Council would be forced to abandon its role as the supreme galactic authority and accept humanity as an equal, or worse, as a superior. For a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 2 millennia, it was a form of surrender that many delegates would consider worse than extinction. "And if we refuse?" asked Ambassador Thokmar, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Elena's expression didn't change, but something cold and implacable entered her eyes. "Then you deal with the Vorthan entities on your own. Our intelligence indicates that they've identified Council territory as a primary target for their next phase of expansion. Without our intervention, you have perhaps 6 months before your core worlds are overrun." General Foster Kim activated a tactical display that showed the projected path of Vorthan expansion. The routes of advance led directly to the most heavily populated Council systems, worlds that housed billions of civilians and contained the industrial centers that kept galactic civilization functioning. However, Dr. Chen Petrov added with the clinical detachment of a research scientist, "If you choose to accept our offer of assistance, we can guarantee the complete elimination of the Vorthan threat within 90 days. The certainty in her voice was more terrifying than any threat. This was not the boastful confidence of a military commander or the diplomatic bluster of a negotiator. This was the calm statement of someone who had already run the calculations and knew exactly how the equation would balance. Vexstar looked around the chamber at the faces of his fellow councillors. He saw fear, anger, desperation, and beneath it all, the slow recognition that their age of dominance was ending. The galaxy that had rejected humanity 2 centuries ago was dying, consumed by threats it could not comprehend and challenges it could not meet. "We require time to consider your proposals," Vexstar said finally. "Of course," Elena replied graciously. "You have 4 hours to reach a decision. After that, our forces will redeploy to protect Terran interests exclusively." As the human delegation prepared to leave, Elena paused at the chamber threshold and looked back at the assembled council. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of her ancestors' final words in this same room. 200 years ago, my great-grandmother stood where I stand now, and warned you that exile would not humble humanity. She told you that hardship would not make us suitable to your standards. She predicted that you would eventually come looking for us, and that when you found us, you would pray that we remembered why we once wanted to be your allies. The chamber was utterly silent, every delegate frozen by the weight of historical irony. We do remember, Alina continued. We remember every slight, every condescending comment, every assumption that we were too primitive for civilized society. But we also remember that we once offered to be your partners in exploring and protecting this galaxy. That offer no longer stands. We are no longer the species you exiled. But we are prepared to be your allies in facing the darkness that threatens us all. She smiled, the expression containing both forgiveness and warning. The choice is yours, High Counselor. You can accept us as equals and benefit from everything humanity has learned in our exile. Or you can maintain your pride and face extinction with the dignity that seems to matter so much to galactic civilization. After the humans left, the chamber erupted in desperate arguments and frantic consultations. Some delegates called for resistance, claiming that accepting human terms would be the end of everything the Council represented. Others argued for immediate surrender, pointing out that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. Bextar listened to the debates with growing despair, knowing that the decision had already been made by forces beyond their control. The galaxy had changed while they slept in the comfort of established dominance. The exiled humans had evolved into something unprecedented, a civilization that combined absolute technological superiority with the hard wisdom of 2 centuries spent fighting for survival in the cosmic wilderness. When the vote was finally taken, the result was overwhelming. 1,847 in favor of accepting human terms, 23 opposed, and 12 abstentions. Not a single species was willing to face the Vorthan threat without human assistance. As Vaxstar prepared the formal surrender documents, he reflected on the bitter irony of the situation. The Council had banished humanity for being too dangerous, too aggressive, too willing to resort to violence. In the end, those very qualities had become the galaxy's salvation. The humans had kept their promise. They had evolved during their exile, had become something the galaxy had never seen before. But they had evolved into protectors, as much as conquerors, guardians as much as warriors. When the Vorthan entities finally fell to human weapons that rewrote the laws of physics themselves, and when the grateful species of the galaxy looked up at the stars and saw the silver ships of the Terran Dominion keeping eternal watch, they would understand what the Council had thrown away 2 centuries ago. They had exiled their own guardians, and now those guardians had returned to save the children who had rejected them. The age of the Galactic Council was ending, but the age of humanity had just begun.